The last Thursday of every month, our regional manager held what he called a momentum check. 30 minutes on a video call where every account executive on the West Coast team reported their pipeline numbers out loud, one by one, while everyone else listened. I had been dreading that call all week, not because my numbers were bad, but because I'd barely slept in 4 days, and my voice had that thin, frayed quality that gives you away before you even say a word. I was still on the call when I heard it. A scraping sound. Somewhere down the hall when I heard it. A scraping sound. Somewhere down the hall. The kind of sound furniture makes when someone drags it across hardwood without lifting it. I muted myself and pulled out my earpiece for a second, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. But no, there it was again. A thud. Then my mother's voice, low and instructional, the tone she uses when she's organizing something and expects everyone to fall in line. I put the earpiece back in, told myself it was nothing, and unmuted. Pipeline's at 240 for Q3, I said. Closing 2 deals before month end. My manager said good. Moved on to the next person. I sat there for the remaining 20 minutes of that call with my eyes fixed on the hallway, watching the shadows under my bedroom door shift. I should tell you about the house first. My parents bought it in 2009, when real estate was on the floor and my father was still working as a foreman at a distribution warehouse outside of Sacramento. It was a 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, but solid. Good bones, my mother always said. She was proud of it in the specific way people are proud of things they fought to get. Then, 2018 happened. My father's back gave out. Surgery, then complications, then a long, slow slide into disability. He couldn't work. My mother had been out of the workforce for over a decade by then, and her re-entry options were limited. They burned through savings faster than anyone planned. By mid-2019, they were 4 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank had started the foreclosure process. I was 26. I had been out of the house for 3 years at that point, living in a studio apartment in Folsom, working as a pharmaceutical sales rep. I wasn't wealthy. I had a decent salary, a small emergency fund, and a credit score I had spent years building carefully. When my mother called me that July and told me what was happening, I drove to Sacramento that same weekend. We sat at the kitchen table, my parents, me, and a folder of paperwork that told a very clear story. I looked at the numbers. I looked at my parents. My father had lost weight. My mother looked like she hadn't slept properly in months. I called a real estate attorney I had found online. I called my bank. I spent 2 weeks making phone calls and running numbers and reading documents I had to Google half the vocabulary for. And at the end of it, I bought the house. Not in a dramatic sense. I didn't swoop in with a briefcase full of cash. I assumed the remaining mortgage balance, paid off the arrears, and had the deed transferred into my name. My parents stayed. We agreed they would contribute what they could toward utilities and groceries, and I would cover the mortgage, property taxes, and insurance. My name went on the deed. That part was non-negotiable. The attorney was clear about it, and honestly, so was I. Not out of distrust, but because I needed to be protected legally. My parents understood. My mother signed the paperwork without complaint. We hugged in the parking lot of the title company, and she said thank you, and I said of course. I moved back in 6 months later when my lease ended. It made financial sense. I was saving money, and I was close enough to help with my father's appointments. I had my own room, my own bathroom, my own space. It worked. For a while. My brother had been living in Phoenix for 6 years. He worked in logistics for a freight company, mid-level manager, the kind of job that sounds more stable than it is. He and his wife had separated the previous winter, and by spring he was calling my mother every Sunday, and by summer, those calls had a particular undertone to them, a searching quality, like someone measuring something without saying what they're measuring. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. He was going through something hard. I gave him that. Then in August he came for a visit. 5 days, which stretched to 10, which stretched to 3 weeks. He slept on the pullout in the den. He ate with us every night. He watched television with my father and helped my mother with yard work, and slowly, incrementally, made himself at home. in the way that people do when they're deciding to stay somewhere and haven't told anyone yet. The night before he was supposed to leave, flights booked, bags supposedly packed, my mother made lasagna, which she only does for occasions. I should have read that. I sat down at the table and my father was already seated, and my brother was already seated, and my mother came out of the kitchen with the dish and set it on the table, and then sat down and looked at me with an expression I recognized. The expression she uses right before she says something she has already decided. "We've been talking," she said, "and we think it would make sense for your brother to move back." I didn't say anything immediately. I waited. He's going through a difficult time. This is his family. He needs to be near people who love him. She paused. "We were thinking he could take your room. You could use the den," or she glanced at my brother. "We thought maybe you'd want to look at apartments nearby. You've been so independent, it might be nice to have your own place again." My brother looked at the lasagna. My father looked at his hands. I looked at my mother and I thought, she has no idea. She genuinely has no idea. "It's an interesting idea," I said. I kept my voice even. "Let me think about it." My mother smiled. Not a warm smile, a satisfied one. The kind that means the matter is settled. The next morning, I called my attorney. Her name is Kathleen, and she is the kind of person who answers questions in a way that makes you feel both reassured and slightly afraid of her, which is exactly what you want in an attorney. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. "Your name is on the deed," she said when I finished. "Yes, then you own the house. They have no legal standing to reassign rooms, displace you, or invite someone else to take up residence without your consent. I know that. So what do you need from me?" "I need to understand my options," I said. "Because I don't think yelling at my mother at the dinner table is going to solve this." She walked me through it. The proper way to document everything. The formal process if it came to that. What a notice to vacate looked like. What my rights were and what theirs were. By the time we hung up, I had a clear picture of exactly where I stood legally, and I had made a decision about how I wanted to handle it. I wasn't going to say anything yet. I was going to watch. I wanted to understand exactly how far this was going to go before I showed my hand. It went further than I expected. Within 2 weeks, my brother had brought a U-Haul's worth of boxes from a storage unit in Phoenix. They were stacked in the den, which was apparently now his room, while my room was being transitioned. My mother had already started referring to it as your brother's room when she talked to relatives on the phone, which I heard through the wall more than once. One afternoon, I came home from a client visit to find a woman I didn't know standing in my bedroom doorway holding a color swatch fan. She was there to consult on repainting. My mother had hired her. I introduced myself as the homeowner and told her politely that there had been a miscommunication and the project wasn't moving forward. She looked uncertain. I thanked her for her time. My mother appeared in the hallway as the woman was leaving, and the look on her face was something I will not forget. Not embarrassed, not apologetic, annoyed. Like I had created a problem by being there. "We were just looking at options," she said. "That's my room," I said. "You don't make decisions about my room. This is a family home." I didn't answer that. I went into my room, closed the door, and texted Kathleen. The dinner that broke it open wasn't planned. My aunt and her husband were visiting from Modesto, and my mother had made it into a small occasion. 6 people at the table, good dishes out, the kind of family gathering that has its own pressure. My brother was animated in a way he hadn't been in weeks. He talked about his plan to find a job locally, to get back on his feet, to be near family. My aunt nodded along warmly. My mother kept touching his arm. At some point, my aunt turned to me and said, gently, "It's nice that you're being so flexible, sweetheart. Not everyone would do that for their family." I looked at her. I looked at my mother. I looked at my brother, who was suddenly very interested in his water glass. "Actually," I said, "I want to make sure everyone's on the same page about something." I kept my voice calm, conversational even. "I own this house. My name is on the deed. I assumed the mortgage in 2019 when Mom and Dad were facing foreclosure. I've been paying the mortgage, property taxes, and insurance every single month since then." The table got very quiet. I've been patient because I wanted to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, I continued. But in the last few weeks, my room has been reassigned without my consent. A painter was brought in without my knowledge, and my brother has moved belongings into this house without asking me. None of that is okay. My mother's face had gone through several expressions in quick succession and had landed somewhere between fury and disbelief. You are talking about this at the dinner table? Yes, I said, because the conversations I've tried to have privately haven't changed anything. My brother put down his fork. I didn't know, he said, and I believed him, which was a strange thing to feel in that moment. Not anger at him exactly, but something exhausted. Mom told me it was the family home. It is the family home, my mother said. Her voice had gone rigid. She did what she did to help the family. That doesn't mean... It does mean, I said. It means exactly what it means legally. And I've spoken to my attorney. I want to be careful about how I tell this part, because it's easy to make it sound cleaner than it was. My father didn't say a word during the dinner. He sat there with his hands flat on the table and he looked at me with an expression that contained, I don't know how to describe it exactly. Recognition, maybe. Like he understood something that he hadn't let himself understand before. After my aunt and her husband left, he found me in the kitchen and he said, quietly, I'm sorry. I didn't know your mother had gone this far. I believed him too. That was the hardest part. Not that my mother had done what she'd done, which I could trace the logic of even if I couldn't accept it, but that my father was sitting in a house I owned, apologizing to me, and I loved him completely and was furious at the situation entirely, and those two things had to coexist. I told him I wasn't angry at him. I meant it. The formal conversation with my mother happened 2 days later. I asked her to sit down. I had a folder. Not to be dramatic, but because I had learned from the process of buying the house that you keep paperwork, I had a copy of the deed. I had a printed summary of what I had paid over the last 4 years. Mortgage, taxes, insurance, the arrears I had covered in 2019. The total was significant. I didn't show her the folder to be cruel. I showed it to her because I needed her to understand that this was not abstract. This was documented. This was real. She looked at the papers for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said, I thought it was still the family home. It is, I said. But I'm the one who owns it. Those two things aren't in conflict unless someone tries to make them conflict. I was trying to help your brother. I know. But you can't give away something that isn't yours to give. She was quiet for a while. The kind of quiet that has a lot of things moving under the surface. What do you want? She finally asked. I want to be clear about how this house works going forward, I said. My brother can stay temporarily while he figures out his situation. That's a conversation I'm willing to have. But decisions about this house go through me. The room reassignment is off the table, and I need you to acknowledge directly that you understand who owns this house. It took her a moment, but she said it. My brother found a job in Sacramento about 6 weeks later, warehouse operations manager for a distribution company which turned out to suit him. He moved into an apartment in Natomas in November. On the last day before he left, he helped me hang a shelf in the kitchen that had been sitting in a box for 3 months, and we ordered pizza and ate it standing at the counter. And he said, I really didn't know. I know, I said. That was messed up of her. Yeah, he nodded. We didn't talk about it more than that. We didn't need to. My mother and I took longer. We're not the kind of people who process things quickly or out loud. We had a few stiff weeks where conversations were practical and nothing more. But she's not a bad person. She's a person who loves her son in a way that made her stop thinking clearly, and who had perhaps never fully reckoned with the fact that her daughter had saved her home and then gone on quietly paying for it while life continued. One evening in December, she found me going through some files at the kitchen table. Insurance renewal documents, property tax statement, and she sat down across from me and watched me for a minute and then said, You've been carrying this for 4 years. Yes. I didn't see it, I know. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine for a moment. That was it. That was the whole conversation. But I understood what it meant, and she understood what it meant, and we have been okay since then, more or less, in the way families are okay. Imperfectly, with ongoing effort, without any guarantee. The house is mine. That hasn't changed. My parents are still there, and some months are easier than others, and my father's health has its good stretches and its bad ones, and I'm still paying the mortgage, and I will be for years. That's not a complaint. It's just the shape of my life right now. But I'm the one who holds the deed. I'm the one who stood in the title company parking lot at 26 years old and signed my name on a document that changed everything. And I'm the one who has kept signing checks and filing paperwork and making phone calls every year since. That is real. That is documented. And now everyone in my family knows it. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. Not in a regretful way. More like the way you trace a route on a map after you've already driven it, just to understand the terrain. The honest answer is, not much. Maybe I would have had the formal conversation with my mother earlier, before my brother's boxes were already stacked in the den. Maybe I would have said something that first dinner instead of, let me think about it. But I also know that I needed to see how far it would go. I needed to know whether this was a misunderstanding or a decision. It turned out to be a decision. And knowing that changed how I handled everything that followed. Here's what I've come to understand. The people who love you are not always the people who see you clearly. My mother loved me. She still does. But for years she looked at the house and saw something she had built, something the family had earned together, without ever fully accounting for the fact that the only reason it still existed was because I had stepped in at 26 and put my name on a document that made it legally mine. She didn't forget that on purpose. She just let it become background, and when my brother needed something, that background conveniently disappeared. That's not malice. That's how people work when they want something to be true. They rearrange the facts until the story they need is the story they have. What I learned, what I had to learn, slowly through all of it, is that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of the people you love. I kept that deed in a folder. I kept records of every payment, not because I was planning for a fight, but because Kathleen told me to, and because somewhere underneath my trust in my family, I understood that clarity protects everyone, not just me. When that dinner happened, I wasn't scrambling. I wasn't emotional in a way that could be dismissed. I had documentation, I had legal counsel, I had already thought through my options before I needed to use them. That preparation was a form of intelligence, but it was also a form of self-respect, knowing your own worth. Concretely, provably, on paper, matters. Not because you should walk around demanding recognition, but because when someone tries to make you invisible, you need something solid to stand on. The resolve it took to sit at that dinner table in front of my aunt and my family and say the thing that needed to be said, that didn't come from nowhere. It came from 4 years of getting up and paying a mortgage every month without anyone asking me to, without anyone acknowledging it, without any guarantee that it would ever be recognized. You build a kind of quiet strength in that silence, and when the moment came, it was there. My brother is doing well in Natomas. My father's health is what it is. My mother and I talk most days now. The house is still mine. I don't need it to be a dramatic story. It's just my life, and I chose to live it honestly, and that turned out to be enough.